Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The topic today is hepatitis C, and today we will be discussing its diagnosis and its treatment. For diagnosis, we both have the serological test and the nucleic acid tests. The first test is the performance of anti-HCV, and by the latest ELISA techniques, these are very specific and the sensitivity is almost 99%. And once you have positive anti-HCV, then you have to confirm the presence of active disease, and that is with the help of the RNA estimation by the PCR. So we have these tests which are available for the diagnosis and assessment of the hepatitis C virus infections: the anti-HCV, and then PCR qualitative and quantitative, the HCV genotyping, and in some cases the HCV core antigen detection. The anti-HCV, this is the first test which we perform to make diagnosis of the hepatitis C virus infections. Most of the time it is still done by the screening techniques which have very low specificity and very low sensitivity, and there is possibility of false negative and false positive test. But the recommendation is to do this test by the ELISA, and now we have third and fourth generation ELISA which are very specific and very sensitive. Remember, this is antibody, and this will only become positive after a few weeks, and with the third and fourth generation ELISA it takes about 8 to 10 weeks for these antibodies to appear in the blood, and still you can have false negative and false positive test with this anti-HCV. What is false negative? False negative means that this patient has been exposed to hepatitis C virus, the disease is active, but the antibody test is still negative. And the setting where you can get this false negative anti-HCV, number one is acute hepatitis. For acute hepatitis to make diagnosis, if we base the diagnosis on anti-HCV, as I said, this takes about 8 to 10 weeks for these antibodies to appear in the blood. So during this duration, the diagnosis should be made on the basis of the RNA estimation by the PCR, because the antibody will take about 8 to 10 weeks, and if you are basing your diagnosis on simple anti-HCV, this will be false negative. And sometimes you can have even false positive anti-HCV during acute hepatitis. If the disease is very severe and the levels of gamma globulins in the LFT is very high, sometimes you can have also positive anti-HCV, and this will be false positive. So remember, in the setting of acute hepatitis, the diagnosis should be made on the basis of the PCR testing and not on the basis of the anti-HCV. The second setting where you can have the false negative anti-HCV is in the immunocompromised patients. Because of their suppressed immunity, they may not be able to make antibodies, so you can have no antibodies and still patient is having C positive disease. So this is the setting where you can have false negative disease. And similarly, patients who are CKD patients and they are on dialysis, the antibodies may be washed out and the diagnosis may be false negative. So in patient of CKD, if you want to establish the diagnosis of hepatitis C, it should again be on the basis of the PCR, not anti-HCV. And similarly, you can have false positive anti-HCV. And what is false positive? The patient has no active disease, but still the anti-HCV is positive. And the setting where you can get false positive, after spontaneous regulation, in 15 to 20% of the cases, body's immune system is capable of controlling the disease and disease is resolved spontaneously. Or if you treat the patient and patient get cured, these anti-HCV, they remain positive throughout the life of the patients. So now this is a false positive test. And the other setting is the babies who are born to C positive mothers. Because of the placental transfer of these antibodies they remain in the blood of the newborn for almost 1 year. So now if you make a diagnosis on the basis of anti-SCV, this will be a false positive test. So in the newborn baby, if you want to establish a diagnosis, it should be with the help of PCR, which should be done after 1 month. And if you want to confirm the diagnosis on the basis of anti-SCV, it should only be done after 1 year of the life. So remember, the anti-SCV, which is the initial test for making diagnosis of hepatitis C virus, but it has got certain limitations. It does not differentiate between acute and chronic infection. It does not differentiate between past and present infections. And similarly, it is not helpful to decide whether the disease is active, resolved or cured. And it should not be repeated. In our setting, the patients and the doctors, they go on repeating the test, and then they get the false impression that the disease is still active, it has not been cured. And second mistake we commonly make is the quantification of this anti-SCV on the ELISA. Once the APASL recommended the quantification of this anti-SCV for diagnosis, but later on this recommendation was withdrawn, and now there is no value of quantification of anti-SCV. It is simply positive or negative. So there is no fun in repeating the ELISA test again and again and to make false impression on the basis of its positive results or its quantitative values. And once the anti-SCV is positive, the second step is to confirm the presence of active disease, and that is the requirement for the treatment. You should not be treating the patient simply on the basis of positive anti-SCV. So the detection of the RNA with the help of the PCR is done for these 4 indications. Number 1, to confirm the presence of active and current disease. And number 2, once you are treating the patient, then to monitor the response during this treatment, the monitoring is done with the help of the quantification of the RNA with PCR. And once you have completed the treatment, whether patient has responded or not responded, again that estimation is with the PCR, not with the anti-SCV. Another indication for this RNA PCR is for screening of the blood and blood products. Commonly screening is done with the help of anti-SCV, but in some of the countries the screening is done with the PCR. So once you decide to check the PCR, it should be done with a very sensitive assay. And remember, the qualitative test is more sensitive as compared to the quantitative. And there are a number of techniques through which we can perform the PCR. The old one is to do for the simple qualitative and quantitative assays. Now we can have the real-time PCR, which have a wide range of the estimation of the viral load, and with the more sensitive assays, now we can detect the load as low as just 15 internal units per milliliter. But still, this test is very expensive, and now the overall treatment is very cheap. So there is always a need for a cheap assay which can be applied on large scale for diagnosis and for during special settings. And although this assay may not be more sensitive, but still it will be more applicable in general population screening and diagnosis. Another thing to remember is with PCR, and especially when you are performing the quantitative PCR, the levels of the SCV RNA, it may vary widely, and sometimes there may be interval up to the several weeks where the viral load is so low that it may be undetectable. So any patient who is anti-SCV positive and his RNA is also negative, then these individuals, they should be repeating their PCR after 12 to 24 weeks. before we label them as negative for PCR. So one negative PCR should always be repeated to confirm its presence or its absence. If the PCR is not available or there are financial constraints, another alternative is to go for the estimation of the core antigen. But remember, this is less specific and less sensitive as compared to the PCR, and in some of the patients where PCR is definitely positive, the core antigen may be negative. So this is an alternative to the PCR, but remember, this is less sensitive and less specific. And this table shows the values of 3 common tests and their interpretation in the setting of the chronic infections, acute infections, or those patients who already have their PCR or their anti-SCV cleared. And these tests are: number 1, the antibody test, the anti-SCV, then the PCR qualitative or quantitative, and third one is the ALT test, which is an indirect marker of underlying liver inflammations. So if the patient who has cleared his hepatitis C virus, the various markers will be that his anti-SC will be positive because this remains positive throughout the patient's life, but obviously the PCR will be negative, and ALT level may be normal, they may fluctuate, and sometimes they may persistently raised. So ALT, they do not truly correlate with underlying liver disease. So patient who already has cleared his infection, the anti-SC will be negative, the PCR will be, anti-SCV will be positive, PCR will be negative, and ALT level may be variable. For acute SCV, as I said, the antibody will take some time, so anti-SCV will be negative and they will only become positive after about 8 to 10 weeks. But the PCR will be positive because this RNA appears in the blood in the first 1 to 2 weeks, and obviously with the acute SCV, the ALT level will be high, and sometimes the level may be 7 to 10 times the upper limit of normal. And with chronic SCV, the SCV has got the propensity to become chronic in 70 to 80% of the cases. And this is the main danger, because whenever you will get infections, there are chances it will progress to chronicity in about 80 to 85% of the patients. And in the setting of chronic SCV infections, obviously the anti-SCV will be positive, and now the PCR will be also positive because this will be an active disease. And again, the ALT level will be variable. They may be persistently normal, they may be fluctuating levels, or they may be high levels. Another important test is the estimation of this SCV genotyping. In the last lecture I said the SCV has got 7 genotypes. 6 are the major genotype, the 7th is still in the process of its development, and its characters are being recognized. And this genotyping is because the genetic structure of the virus is different in the different region of the world. And if you have 30% difference in the homology of this DNA, this RNA, this will become genotype. And in genotype, again, if you have variation of 20%, this will become subtype. So in the initial stages of SCV, when the treatment was done with the interferon, this genotyping estimation was very essential, because there were clear-cut differences in the response of the treatment with different genotypes. And in that era of the interferon, the genotype 1 was most difficult genotype, and its treatment duration was also 48 weeks as compared to 24 weeks with other type of genotypes. Now the available drugs, they are effective against all the genotypes. We have pan-genotypic directly acting oral drugs, so estimation of genotyping is not essential now, but it is still required for genotype 1, where you can have variable response with genotype 1A, 1B, and the choice of the drug is still different. And now with the availability of these oral drugs, the genotype 3, which is the genotype mainly in our population, has become the most difficult genotype. Some genotypes, they are also associated with specific features, like genotype 3 is associated with underlying steatosis. It has got more association with diabetes. So after you have established the diagnosis, the next step is the treatment of the patients. And what are the goal of the treatment? Obviously, the main goal is to cure the SCV infections, and this cure is required to prevent the progression of the disease, to prevent the complications of anti-SCV related liver and extrahepatic diseases, and with the cure of the disease, the patient will not progress to the end stage liver disease. Patient will not progress to the complications associated with the cirrhosis like decompensations and like hepatocellular carcinoma. The other goal is to improve the quality of life and to remove the stigmata which is associated with liver disease. If the patient has got the liver disease, he will always be feeling this, he is suffering from some incurable disease, and he sometimes can get all the complications. So to remove this stigmata, one has to get cure of these hepatitis C virus infections. And obviously, once you get cure, the onward transmission of the SCV to the other person is also controlled. So to summarize, the main goal of the treatment is to get eradication of SCV infection in the acute stages. The second goal is to prevent its development and development of the chronic SCV infections in the setting of acute infections, to decrease the SCV associated morbidity and mortality, and to attain the SVR. The main goal of the treatment is to achieve SVR, which is sustained viral response. And sustained viral response is once you have completed the treatment, then you repeat the PCR, and now the repeating time is after 12 weeks. With the interferon, we used to repeat after 24 weeks. And if the PCR is still negative 12 weeks after the completion of treatment, we claim that this patient has got complete cure, or this patient has achieved sustained viral response, SVR. So main goal of treatment is to achieve the SVR. Obviously, the biochemical normals, the ALT, AST, they should also be normalized. The patient's symptoms should be improved, and to prevent the progression to cirrhosis and to hepatocellular carcinoma. And obviously, with the prevention of this progression, the development of the end stage liver disease will also be prevented. Remember, there is no vaccine available because of multiple reasons. So we have to mainly focus on the preventions. And the main factor is to modify the risk factors which are associated with its onward transmissions. And in the last lecture, we discussed in detail about the various risk factors. The commonest risk factors in the Western country is the intravenous drug abuse. So especially those patients who are being treated with oral methadone. So proper measures should be taken to minimize the risk with this intravenous drug abuse. Another important risk is the sexual contact, and especially the homosexual person and the men who have sex with men, and obviously appropriate barrier contraceptions and other measures should be adopted. Important route of transmission is through the blood and blood products, so this should be avoided. And all those parenteral measures which can be responsible for transmissions like body piercing, sharing of razors, or receiving the tattoos. They should also be taken care of. And with the presence of the co-infection with hepatitis A virus and hepatitis B virus, the risk of progression of liver disease becomes very high. So these patients, they should be properly vaccinated against the hepatitis B virus or hepatitis A virus. And once you decide to treat this patient, in addition to the baseline viral investigation which we have discussed, the other factor is to assess the severity of the liver disease, and there is possible with the help of the estimation of liver function test. But remember, the ALT level is not a true reflection of underlying liver disease. And then the severity of liver disease, the inflammation and fibrosis. The gold standard is liver biopsy, but now we have non-invasive markers in the form of the fibroscans, which is done either with the shear wave elastography or with the transit wave elastography, and that can reflect the underlying fibrosis and the degree of inflammation. And coming to the treatment, the older treatment was with the interferon, and we have two types of interferon, the standard interferon and the pegylated interferons, and that interferon was used along with the antiviral drug ribavirin. But now we have the directly acting antiviral drugs, both the ribavirin and the interferon. They were not directly acting on the life cycle of the virus. The interferon basically is immunomodulating drugs, so this will modulate the immunity, and that will then control the virus. So the response was never optimum. And now we have the drugs which act directly on the various steps in the life cycle of the virus, are the drugs which act at the host targets. So we have directly acting antivirals and the host target antivirals, and three categories of these drugs, they are now available, and they are always used in combination. And we have the protease inhibitors, the replicase inhibitors, and the polymerase inhibitors. Very briefly about the old modalities of treatment, the interferon. The interferons basically are proteins which are synthesized by the host cells in response to various inducers, and once they are produced, they in turn cause biochemical changes in the cells, and these biochemical changes, they lead to antiviral state in the cells. So once a cell is infected with the virus and it produces interferon, then that interferon, that protein, it interferes with the invasion of that cell with the new virus. So this was the reason it was called interferon, because it interferes with the invasion of these infected cell by the new virus. And there are different classes of these interferons. The commonly used are alpha, beta, and gamma interferons. And these interferons, obviously because they are produced by the cells, so they are the cytokines, and they are very potent cytokines that possess some antiviral activity, but mainly they have anti-proliferative activity. So you will find them to be used in number of malignancies, like in the chronic myeloid leukemia and other type of malignancies. And the important property for which they are used in the chronic SCV infection is their immunomodulatory activity, and they are given by the subcutaneous injections. And the standard interferon, because it has got a short half-life, so it is given 3 times a week. It was given on alternate days. The common dose is 3 million units given subcutaneously every alternate days, but they have associated side effects, and when the dose exceeds more than 1 or 2 million units, then it is associated with the influenza-like syndrome, and the common symptoms, they include fever, myalgias, arthralgias, headache, and chills and rigors. The standard interferons, they have got very short half-life. Their half-life was only 6 hours, and once they were given 3 times a week, the maximum duration for which the virus is exposed to this interferon is thus 36 weeks. It is RNA virus, it is rapidly multiplying, so most of the time new copies are made, and because of the very short half-life of the virus, the response was very poor and the outcome was very poor. So there is always need to improve the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of these interferons, and that was done with the help of the pegylation, which was approved by the FDA in 2001. And in this process of pegylation, we attach a molecule of PEG, which is polyethylene glycol, to the chain of the interferon, and by attaching this process we have a significant effect, positive effect, on the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of the interferon. And 2 types of the pegylated interferons, they are available, and remember we mainly use the alpha interferon and class 2 for the treatment of hepatitis C virus. So interferon alpha 2A and 2B, there is only difference of 1 amino acid in these interferons, and with the help of these pegylations we are able to give this interferon once weekly, because its half-life is now prolonged, it is almost 96 hours, so it is now convenient to give them once weekly injections. And this is one type of the pegylated interferon, alpha 2A, and this has got a long chain, and its volume of distribution is small, so it is given in a fixed dose of 180 microgram. The other type of interferon has got short chain, its volume of distribution is very high, so it has to be based on the body weight, 1.5 microgram per kilogram body weight for alpha 2B. So the advantages of these pegylated interferon over the conventional interferons, they have slow absorptions, they have reduced distributions, they have lower elimination rate, and thus they have greater therapeutic efficacy because their duration of action is now much long. But they again have some clinically important side effects, and there are 4 types of side effects which are important. The flu-like symptoms, just like the standard interferons, and to minimize these flu-like symptoms, it was recommended that injection should be given in the evening and patient should be taking proper rest, and one can also advise tablet paracetamol, 2 tablets before injections, and then one can repeat after 6 hours to minimize these flu-like symptoms. The other common side effect are hematological malignancies. This causes severe bone marrow suppression, and the common reflection of this bone marrow suppression is the low level of the platelets. So it was always essential to estimate the level of the platelets before this start treatment, and it was also required to monitor these platelets during the treatment, and if the level will fall below a certain limit, then we have to modify the dose or we have to stop the treatment. Another important side effect is their CNS depression, and they can sometimes induce suicidal thoughts and even suicidal tendencies. So patient with major depressions, patient with uncontrolled epilepsies, and patient with recent CVAs is one of the contraindications to use interferons. And because they are immunomodulatory drugs, so they always can induce autoimmune phenomena, and thyroid abnormalities are very common. So during treatment with the pegylated interferon, it was always required to monitor for the possibility of hypo or hyperthyroidism. Another important association with optic neuropathy, and that should always be assessed in all the patients who are being treated with these pegylated interferons. The other drug which was used with these interferons is ribavirin. It is an antiviral drug. It is one of the purine nucleoside analog, and it has attached D-ribose sugar to the nucleoside attachment, and this is effective against a number of viruses, both RNA viruses and the DNA viruses. Available as tablets and capsules of 200 milligrams, 600 milligrams and 400 milligram, and dose if the patient is weighing less than 50 kilogram, the dose is 1000 milligram, and if the weight is more than 50 kilogram, then the dose is 1200 milligram. Another way is 11 milligram per kilogram body weight. Initially, this ribavirin was tried as monotherapy for 6 to 12 months, but the only success was to decrease the level of the aminotransferases, and there was no effect on the RNA level. So later on it was combined with the interferons, and then the response was much better in combination with these interferon. Remember, this is a toxic drug and it has got number of common side effects, and one of the most clinically significant side effect is it causes a dose related hemolytic anemia. So any patient who is already anemic, or patient who is vulnerable to get anemia, or patient who cannot tolerate anemia, like patient with CVAs or patient with congestive cardiac failure, they are the patients where the ribavirin should not be used. So CKD is one setting where patient is already anemic and patient is vulnerable to get anemias, patient with hemoglobinopathies, patient with thalassemias. So all these categories of patients, they should not be using ribavirin. It also increases the level of uric acid, and sometimes it can precipitate the attack of gout, dry cough, and other common associations, fatigue and insomnia and depressions. And one very important side effect is its teratogenic effects. So any female who is using this ribavirin should not become pregnant during the course of the treatment, and this has got a very long half-life. So after completion of treatment, these contraceptive measures should be continued for next 6 months. So almost for 9 to 12 months with ribavirin, these patients, they should not become pregnant. And if the male partner is using this ribavirin during the course of the treatment, again the female should not be pregnant, and these contraceptive measures should continue even after 4 months of completion of the treatment, even if the male partner is using the ribavirin. So one has to remember this teratogenicity with the ribavirin, and this is important factor to imply in clinical practice. With the standard interferon alone, the response was just 10 to 15%, and when this was combined with the ribavirin, there was significant improvement, but still response was just 40%. And with the addition of the pegylated interferon, in cases of genotype 1, the response was 50%, and for genotype 3, response was 70 to 80%. So significant improvement in the response with the pegylated interferon, but still this was not optimum. So still there was need for a better drug for a better and optimum response. And to understand the mechanism of these new drugs, just review the structure of this RNA SEV. It has got a linear structure, an open reading frame which is flanked by the non-translated region on both sides, 5 non-translated region on one side and 3 non-translated region on the other side, and in between the genome is divided into 10 proteins, and out of these 10 proteins, 3 or 4 they are structural proteins. They are the part of the viral structures, and they are the core antigen, if we start from the left, the C, then two envelope proteins E1 and E2, and then a small protein which was the P7. Some they include this P7 in the category of structure proteins. So then there will be 6 structure proteins, and some of the authorities they recommend that there are only 3 structure proteins, the core, E1 and E2, and then there are 7 non-structure proteins, and the non-structure protein is designated by the name NS, non-structural. So we will have NS1, which sometimes is also known as P7, and then we will have NS2, NS3, and then 4. Non-structured protein 4 has got 2 components, 4A and 4B, and similarly non-structured protein 5 again has got 2 components, A and B. And in this diagram you will find that there are 4 structure proteins, C, E1, E2 and P7, and then there are 6 structure proteins. These non-structure proteins, they behave as various enzymes which are involved in the replication and in the multiplication of the virus, and they are the important targets for the new drugs. So the new drugs, they basically target these non-structure proteins which behave as the enzymes. So there are 3 groups of these oral drugs which basically are acting on these non-structure proteins. We have the protease inhibitor, because the NS3 along with NS4, it behaves as protease, the serine protease, and the inhibitor of these drugs, they will be protease inhibitors. The second target is NS5A, which act as a replicase, another important step in the viral replication and its multiplications. So its inhibitor will be replicase inhibitors. And then we have the NS5B inhibitors, which is basically the polymerase, and its inhibitors is the polymerase inhibitors. So these 3 categories of drugs, the protease inhibitors, the replicase inhibitors and the polymerase inhibitors, they act directly on the viral function and viral replication, so they are known as directly acting antivirals. And this table shows these 3 categories of drugs, and now a number of drugs are available. The first, protease inhibitors, they were marketed in 2011, and 2 drugs were then marketed, the Boceprevir and Telaprevir. This was a big development, but these drugs, they have limitations. Number 1, they were only effective for genotype 1. Number 2, they can only be used in combination with interferon and ribavirin. And number 3, they have number of side effects. So they were withdrawn from the market later on, and then they were new protease inhibitors, and all these protease inhibitors, they have Previr in their name. Boceprevir, Telaprevir, Voxilaprevir, Pretaprevir. You will find whenever you have a protease inhibitor, its name always will end with a Previr. Then the second category is the NS5A inhibitor, which is basically a replicase inhibitor, and all these drugs, they have this Asvir in their name. Their name will end with Asvir. And 2 important drugs which are now available, and they are available in Pakistan and they are being used, is Declatasvir and Velpatasvir, and you have so many other Asvirs in this group. And then the third category of drug is the NS5B inhibitor, which is the polymerase inhibitor, and you have 2 types, the nucleoside type of inhibitors and non-nucleoside. And one of the most important drug in this group is Fosfovir, and this Fosfovir was the first drug which was approved for treatment in December 2013, and this was the first pan-genotypic drugs. So now we have three categories of drugs, and we always use them in combination. And the commonest combination is to use the 5B inhibitor along with 5A inhibitor or with one of the protease inhibitors. So the main core of the treatment is now 5B inhibitor, this fosfovir, and this fosfovir is combined either with one of the tasvirs or with one of the previrs. And in difficult to treat cases, we can combine all these three categories of drugs. So this is the time schedule when these various drugs were available. Before 2011, we have just the interferons, pegylated interferons, and ribavirin. And 2011, the first protease inhibitors, the boceprevir and tenofovir, they were approved and they were marketed, but later on they were withdrawn because of their limitations. And then it was December 2013 when we have this major milestone in the history of this SCV. It was the approval of fosfovir by the FDA, and very next month in January 2014, this drug was also approved by the European Medical Agency. And then the development continues, and now we have number of the drugs available in all three categories in our armory to use against hepatitis C virus. And this is the year-wise discovery of these various drugs. And still number of drugs, they are a pipeline, they are being investigated, and they will be available in the near future. So these directly acting antivirals, the main nucleus of treatment is fosfovir, which is one of the 5B inhibitors or poroimidase inhibitors. And this is a pan-genotypic drug. All previous drugs, they were effective only against one or other genotype. This was the first drug which is effective against all the major 6 genotypes. So this was one of the major breakthrough in the history of the hepatitis C virus treatment. This was the drug from the Gilead, and initial cost was very high. It was $84,000 for one course of 6 months, but later on Gilead allowed this drug to be marketed at a much lower price for the developing countries, and now it is available at a much cheaper price. The other available drug which is commonly used with the fosfovir is 5A inhibitor, this velpatasvir, and now the first choice of treatment is to use a combination of this velpatasvir or declatasvir, which is 5A inhibitor, along with the 5B inhibitor. So the first line of treatment is to use minimum of 2 drugs. And these drugs are very effective, but again they have some adverse effects, and one of the main effects is their drug resistance. So because of this problem of drug resistance, they are never used alone. They are always used in combinations to minimize their resistance. Drug interaction is very important, and you have a websites where you can find all the interactions, possible interactions with these various drugs. And number of websites, one is by the Liverpool, and you can just visit that website and you can find all the important drug interactions. Another important factor is that these drugs, they can cause reactivation of hepatitis C virus. So any patient who is being treated with directly acting antivirals, we have to keep this possibility in mind. And reactivation of the underlying hepatitis B virus infection is a real threat and possibility, and that should be properly considered. And another important aspect is that drugs, they are very effective. They can provide complete cure of hepatitis C virus, but remember, they will just minimize the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma. The risk is never completely eradicated. So even after complete cure of this hepatitis C virus with these directly acting antivirals, we have to keep monitoring these patients for the possibility of this hepatocellular carcinoma. And the simplest way to monitor is 6 months ultrasound or the CT scan and the levels of the alpha fetoproteins. And once we are treating these patients, how the virus will respond and how to monitor the treatment and the various treatment kinetics, the various terminologies which we used to monitor the response to the treatment. Either patient will be responder or patient will be non-responders. And for the responders, if the PCR becomes negative after 4 weeks of starting the treatment, we say this patient has got RVR. Patient has achieved rapid viral response. And once we are treating the patients with the interferon and duration of treatment was 24 weeks or 48 weeks, then during the middle of the treatment we will also assess the level of the RNA, and that was known as EVR, early viral response. And you can have complete or incomplete early viral response. And once you complete the treatment, and then you assess the level of the RNA, and that will be the ETR, the end of treatment response. And as I said previously, once you have completed the treatment, then 12 weeks afterwards you will repeat the RNA to confirm your SVR. So now we talk about the RVR, which is the response after 4 weeks, then ETR, which is response at the end of your treatment, and then SVR, which is response after 12 weeks of completion of your treatment. And if the patient is not responding, he will be a null responders or he will be a partial responders. Or how to differentiate: if the patient shows that the RNA load is not getting lower than the 2 logs, then he will be non-responders. He will be null responders. But if the reduction is more than 2 logs, but at the end of treatment patient is still having positive PCR, so this will be a partial non-responders. So various categories of the kinetics of the virus to these directly acting antivirals. So to conclude, now we are in the era of directly acting antivirals, and this era is evolving very rapidly, and number of drugs are being added to the list of these categories of drugs. And with the availability of these directly acting antivirals, now we can claim that we can completely cure the C infection. With the availability of these drugs, now we can always claim this complete cure of the treatment with complete cure of the SC infections, and that cure is almost possible in 98 to 100% of the cases. So now with the availability of these drugs, we should be treating almost all the patients, and it should be treated right at the time of diagnosis, because delay in treatment will not only affect the overall response to treatment but also will help in the progression of the disease. Thank you very much.